Surprise, surprise. One day after Gavin Newsom finds out his job as governor is safe and sound, LA County unveils vaccine mandates. Starting October 7th, patrons to bars, breweries, wineries, and nightclubs will need to show proof of at least one dose of the vaccine. From November 4th and onward, people will need to be fully vaccinated with 2 doses. This mandate does not include restaurants, shopping malls, movie theaters, and gyms, which makes this new mandate reminiscent of the illogical lockdown measures in early 2020. Now, if you remember, many places in the country allowed bars that served food to remain open, but if your bar didn't serve food, you had to stay closed. Because apparently somehow the virus stops spreading when you're eating and drinking, but continues to spread when you're just drinking. It's science. What's interesting about these new mandates is that LA doesn't have a big bar-only culture. Most bars and many clubs are also restaurants, and these mandates won't apply to them. We also have very few wineries and breweries that don't also serve food. So this announcement just feels like virtue signaling to the voters who supported Newsom and want to see more done to control the spread. On top of this, who will enforce these new mandates? The LAPD? You mean the same LAPD that has thousands of its employees and cops seeking vaccine exemptions? The same LAPD who has police officials suing the government over the Biden mandates? I get the feeling they won't be too keen on shaking down bar owners who refuse to card their patrons. Also part of these new mandates is that for any large event of over 10,000 people, such as a sporting event or concert, people will need to either show proof of a vaccine or a negative test. Showing a negative test result doesn't get you into a bar. So why did the Dodgers and Rams get to have such special treatment? The same question for movie theaters that play Hollywood movies. Why do they have no restrictions? I would love to take a poll to find out how many bar owners voted to recall Newsom compared to how many of the Hollywood elite and sports stars supported his campaign. What's most interesting about these mandates is that more and more people are becoming aware that the vaccines aren't necessarily stopping the spread. As people begin to find out that their coworker, aunt, friends, and half the Yankees baseball team has quote unquote rare breakthrough cases, they begin to question the honesty of our health officials. Are they dishonest or do they just not know? Oh, they know. They have the data. And some honest news organizations are actually reporting on it. But rather than come out and be honest with us, they instead use doublespeak and try to tell us that the vaccine stopped the spread, but if you're fully vaccinated, you still need to wear a mask and social distance. On top of this, the CDC, Fauci, and mainstream news have begun to switch their narratives from the vaccine stopping the spread to the vaccine stopping hospitalizations and death. Now, listen to their words very carefully when they speak, because these two things are not the same. One look at Israel's current spread levels, and we can see this virus shows no signs of slowing down, even as millions of people take their 3rd dose of Pfizer vaccine. In Israel, people can't enjoy restaurants, bars, shopping centers, or any other non-essential service without being fully vaccinated. But the catch is, they only consider you fully vaccinated if you've had 3 doses of the vaccine. Now that it's really clear to an increasing number of people that the virus is still spreading, people then say, well, you don't have the right to overwhelm hospitals, and that's the issue. But the data the health officials used to claim that 99% of the hospitalizations and deaths are in the unvaccinated is data that's cumulative from January through July. Well, how many people were vaccinated in January? What about February, March, or April? I mean, if nearly 100% of your population is unvaccinated, then guess what? You're going to get nearly 100 of your cases, of your severe cases, in the unvaccinated as well. That's how stats work. And that's exactly the argument people make in the reverse. When the numbers began showing a majority of cases within the fully vaccinated population, like in Massachusetts or in the recent college outbreaks, people say, well, as more and more people get vaccinated, the higher the percentage will be of cases within the fully vaccinated population. Okay, it's true that percentages don't matter, because if one person out of 100 gets the virus and that person happens to be vaccinated, you can claim 100% of the cases are fully vaccinated. That's obviously using stats to skew the perception. But if you have more cases today than you did at the same time last year, and yet a majority of your population is fully vaccinated, and it's a majority of them catching the virus, how do you square that with the idea that these vaccines stop the spread? You can't, and our public health officials know this. But again, it's not about spread, they finally admit. It's about overwhelmed hospitals, which actually, I agree with this. I don't think we should look at cases, especially when most cases are either asymptomatic or mild. The only numbers they really should be looking at to gauge where we are in this pandemic are the ICU and death numbers. And now I can get the logic that if the ICUs are filling up with unvaccinated people and it's causing other people to not get the treatment they need, this is a serious issue. I can then understand that it's okay for fully vaccinated to get and spread the virus because they don't at least end up taking up one of those needed beds. I can then get that therefore only the vaccinated can do super spreader things because they won't get too terribly sick. Fine, I can actually see the logic in this line of thinking. But then that should go for the young and healthy as well, regardless of their vaccination status. Despite the fear-mongering news media who want to make it sound like people under 60 are struggling to survive, the stats simply aren't there. Kids are more likely to die of drowning, a car accident, or even gun violence before they die of COVID. And if we really want to limit the hospitals from overflowing, we could easily say it's the overweight and elderly causing the issue, not the unvaccinated. So maybe we should have a passport that counts our calories for us. If you go over your daily limit, no bar or nightclub for you. Too old? Get out of here. But I get it. We don't want to fat shame or discriminate based on age, so we'd rather demonize the unvaccinated instead. But here's the problem. Politico reports that the Biden administration has been given new data this week showing that the vaccine wears off. Not the previous reports that the vaccine still keeps you safe from severe disease. This data shows it significantly wears off even against the most severe of outcomes. And we are about 4 months behind Israel in vaccinations. And in August, they saw their hospitals and morgues filling up with fully vaccinated people. This means the stats will shift. This fall and winter, we can begin to see hospitals filling up with fully vaccinated people as the vaccine wears off. Fully vaccinated people today will essentially be unvaccinated in the coming weeks and months. Will they then be restricted in the same way as someone who never took the vaccine? Will we see either a mandate for a booster dose like we see in Israel? But in Israel, it looked like the booster was working and cases and hospitalizations began to fall. But then suddenly, within days, the number of cases shot back up to record never before seen heights. And the hospitalization rates have begun to climb back up as well. So is it even working? Looking at all this data and the new illogical mandates make many of us trust our health officials and government even less. Are we really following science or are we following fear? Are we really examining the data and making sound decisions based on that data? Or are we just pretending like we know it's going to work and then demanding it of everyone? People are being demonized, segregated, and are being treated like second-class citizens while being screamed at to work together as one. So everyone wants to end this pandemic. No one wants to get sick or die, and no one wants their loved ones to get sick or die. But swarmy politicians issuing meaningless mandates to appease their voters is exactly how we're not going to end this, if we can even end it at all. So, Robbie, this is kind of similar to what you were talking about yesterday, where it seems like there's rules for one and not rules for other, and this is very similar when we saw with the lockdowns in the spring of 2020, and now with these mandates where it's, it doesn't really seem to follow the science necessarily, because why can you go to a restaurant, but now you can't go to a bar? That seems silly. Now, the problem that I'm seeing is that the health officials dangled the carrot, and you were kind of talking about this yesterday, where it's, hey, if you get the vaccine, now you can go back to living your life. And then when they switch it and they say, well, but no, you got to wear a mask and you got to socially distance, it kind of disincentivizes people, right?
Right.
So but they're getting data from Israel, right? They're seeing the data. They're getting the data. And this is why they're looking at it and they're saying, oh, crap. But they already said what they said. Yeah. So they can't go back on it.
Yeah, and we can't go back to the idea of COVID zero. Like, it's never going to happen. We'll have to stay locked down for 100 years. So we have to give up on that. The cases Delta is much more contagious than the original strain. So people are they're going to get sick, but everyone who wants to be quite protected from severe hospitalization, death, they can get vaccinated. I would support them getting boosters if they want to. But you're absolutely right that we have to move beyond the compelling people phase of this, the arbitrary rule phase, because they're not followed equally, they're not enforced equally, and they're to some degree they're so arbitrary. They don't update themselves with the science, and they could go on for years. I remember when it was going to be 2 weeks to slow the spread. Remember, we're just going to shut down for 2 weeks. Then okay, well, we're going to shut down until we have a vaccine. Okay, we're going to shut down until most people have had the opportunity to take the vaccine. No, we're going to shut down to really 90% of people have taken the vaccine. We're going to shut down forever. That's the reality unless we resist some of these things.
Ryan, I actually want to ask you a question on this, because you mentioned even before And I agree with this, that, one of the amazing things about mRNA technology, which I do think is a very fascinating technology that I think can have some real good benefit in the world. And you mentioned that, what's great about it is, typically with traditional virus vaccines, you'd have to find the virus, you'd have to then make it inactive and put it in the solution. And, it's a long process. But with mRNAs, they can get that code. And if they can sequence it, they can whip out a vaccine within days, right? Why haven't they then made a vaccine for the Delta variant? I mean, it makes me wonder if that is actually even possible. They sit there and say, oh, yeah, we can do this, yet we're still given vaccines that are for the Alpha variant, an outdated variant that no one's getting anymore. So why haven't they whipped this sucker out for Delta?
My guess would be because the vaccine is extremely effective against hospitalization, severe disease, and death when it comes to
the data now
Delta.
That they've just got. So they're going to release this data. They're saying, Politico said that the administration should be telling the public about this data either this week or next, but that the data they see says that it wears off significantly and that it's alarming. And Fauci even says, whoa, this is a big.
Well, Kim, I think the answer, part of the answer to your question is it's a supply chain issue, right? They can. You're right. I think they can very quickly make a new vaccine, but then they have to actually produce it at such capacity, and they've already produced all these doses of the one they have. They're also, I keep going back to this. I think there are regulatory issues. I think there have to be new authorizations, perhaps. Now, that is something we absolutely need to reform so that you can get the new version, the version that works on the new variant, like really quickly to market, that you don't have regulatory problems. I think that's something that we desperately need to address.
I feel like we've had Delta now for a while, long enough that they could have had this out by now.
But they knew exactly how to make the correct vaccine for the original strain, like the day the pandemic started. But then and there's some you get more effective at the process. So we're going to cut the time down naturally. But they have to do a certain amount of testing. Some of that testing just has to be done. You can't rush it. Some of it, I think, could be speeded up, and then the bureaucracy gets in the way. But that's the issue.
Right. But it does go to the effectiveness question. According to all the data, it is still effective, even though it is more contagious and it's more virulent. It is still effective against severe disease and death. And Kim, I wanted to just ask you that directly. Like, you say that the data comes from January through July, and so who knows what we can believe. Do you believe that the vaccine is effective against severe illness and death?
I do believe for a period of time. Yeah. But against the Delta, so it looks like that. We don't know really with Alpha, because by the time I feel like everyone got the vaccine, we had already started seeing Delta take hold. We don't know how it's going to be with Lambda or Mu or any other future variant, which we're sure to have. But yeah, it did look like for a period of time, but for only about 6 months to 8 months. And that's the data that we're seeing come out of Israel. And then the Israelis started doing a third booster dose. And even I thought, okay, that looks like that's going to work. I was telling my grandma, get ready, you got to take the booster. You're in that age group. She's 94 years old. I don't want my grandma to die. So, but it looked like that. But now the data coming out of Israel this week, after giving all these booster doses, seeing that the rates are now skyrocketing. I don't know. And I wish that our health officials would also say
it's so contagious that a lot of people are going to get, like, just worldwide. Yeah. Like, you're going to get this thing, or you're going to get the vaccine, or you might get it, and you might get the vaccine and get it anyway. But if you do contract the coronavirus, you're going to wish, in the extreme number of cases, you're going to wish you'd also had the vaccine so that you have a less severe bout with it. That was my experience when I had it. So even if we're lowering the effectiveness number, it's still not the case that, like, well, it's pointless. You should still get it, you're still going to get sick at some point, but you're going to get much less sick. And if you move up the age bracket, the amount less you're going to get sick is important, right?
But the latest data out of New York, for example, on the CDC's own website, is that come like middle of July, they even state on there that the vaccinated versus unvaccinated hospitalization rate in New York is modestly higher in the unvaccinated. It's not significantly. And this is the stuff.
Here we go again. So do you believe the vaccine is effective against severe illness.
I believe it
and
wears
death?
off. I believe the science. It wears off. It wears off. So yeah, you're probably protected for a period of time, but it wears off, and then you're not.
We don't know exactly when it wears off. According to the data that we have here, it's still very effective against severe illness and death in the United States. Like, you agree with that, right?
I agree it wears off. I agree that it's temporary. Yeah, I agree with the science. That's what I agree with.
And also, so this question about whether or not the data can be trusted because it comes from January to July. You also would agree, though, that they know how to do statistical analysis and separate out from the data that they're grabbing, right?
Well, the U.S. data is very different than what other countries are giving us, right? The other country, like Iceland is refreshingly honest. You go to their government website and they just tell you straight up. And that's, we're not really getting that here. They're kind of using these stats. They're trying to get us to take the vaccine, and I understand why they're trying to do that. But they're not, but it becomes, when they do that, and then like what Robbie is saying, they say, take the vaccine, but then, you still have to wear a mask and you still have to social distance. And now colleges are shutting down and sending students back home after 98% of them are vaccinated. I mean, you have to then start to say they know something. And what they know is they're looking at the data, just like I'm looking at it. And
remember
saying
at the beginning of this whole thing, we talked about maybe having a vaccine that was like 50% effective or 70% effective. The vaccine is still pretty good by what the expectations were going into this. I think then maybe we got like our hopes up when it was like, it's 99% effective. We're going to limit cases by 99%, which ended up not being the truth. So it's disappointing, but it's still all we had hoped for at the beginning, and still all we'd hoped for in terms of we thought once we had that, we're going to move on with our lives. And it's frustrating that we're not being allowed to do that, even though we have the thing we said we would need to move on with our lives. Right.
We need a multi-pronged approach. I don't think we can put all of our eggs in one basket. I think there is a place, and there's definitely, for vaccines, and there's also a place for early therapeutics, and there's also, and that's why Pfizer's coming out with people are calling it Pfizer-Mectin. I mean, that they have in clinical trials and early treatment that they're going to be whipping out. So even they're not 100, they're even knowing they're going to need that. So we need a multi-pronged approach to this, and it needs to be more targeted, I think, to those people who are absolutely the most vulnerable.
Yeah, testing.
I think everybody agrees.
Everybody
agrees that multi-pronged approach is important. The data still shows that somewhere between 7 and 11 times more. You're protected at a rate of 7 to 11 times if you have the vaccine versus if you don't have the vaccine.
They're going to come out with new data this week and next week. So I mean, it's evolving. It's constantly evolving. It is what it is.
Okay.
All right, we're going to have more Rising after this.